And where we are at this point, in terms of what we've been doing all day together, because what I'm going to do now is really finish that with something that will also be a discrete hour, though, so you can tap into it, is we've talked this morning about family rituals, and we've talked this afternoon a lot about families and multiple helpers, and what to do when a family has multiple helpers. And it's really that whole multiple helper piece that I want to do now for the remaining hour. This thing is driving me bad. And show you a piece of clinical work that will illustrate some of the things that I'm going to be talking about. The last hour here was entitled something like agency cooperation or something like that, right? And I thought the way we would come at that is to talk about some issues to be aware of when agencies are working together on a case, and then to show you a clinical example of what happens when agencies are not cooperating too well, and then what might be some ways out of that, okay? I think that when there are several systems involved together, either on a project or more often working on a particular case, that you want to discern some major issues having to do with patterns and beliefs, okay? So I look first at the dyadic patterns that are being formed between agencies and the client system, okay? And let me give you a couple of concepts to hang that on. In the family therapy field, dyads, interacting dyads, have been talked about as being either complementary or symmetrical in nature, okay? And when that work was originally done by the Bateson Project in the 1950s, they were talking about married couples being either complementary predominantly or symmetrical. What they meant with that is if we take a complementary pair, we're talking about the exchange of behaviors that fit and imply each other. So for instance, teacher-learner is a complementary dyad. Advice giver, advice receiver. Sometimes in spouses, you'll see in the literature under-responsible, over-responsible. Okay, so the behavior fits and implies each other. Now, in helping systems, you see what I'm thinking about there is that you can take that concept and apply it not to two people, but to any pair. So if you have a welfare department and a mental health system, if you have a mental health worker and a client, if you have a school and a family, that you can begin to look and see, is that a complementary relationship? Does the behavior fit and imply each other in some kind of a way? Or is the relationship symmetrical, predominantly symmetrical, meaning that the participants are defining it as more equal, and if you do something, I can do something too. If you lead, I can lead. If you have a good idea, I have a good idea. Okay, so when we're again talking about marriages with that, those would be marriages that are characterized more by sort of a spirit of equality, sometimes a spirit of competition, so that it's not just if you have a good idea, I have a good idea, but if you have a good idea, I have a better one. And that again, you can look at agency relationships in that same way, that if you have a pair of agencies or a pair of workers from two different agencies or subsystems within an agency, that they may be defining their relationship as symmetrical, as if you can do it, I can do it. If you have a say on this, I have a say on this, okay? Now, neither of those patterns are inherently good or bad, okay? Functional, not functional. However, as with all human patterns, there is a tendency for them to become more of themselves, for them to spin out in some way. Those of you that were here the last couple of hours, we looked at a case where complementarity between the mother and the helpers had become dysfunctional. The more they helped, the more helpless she became. The more helpless she became, the more they helped, okay? And that's one problem when you're looking at the helping system in terms of complementarity, that it spins out in some kind of a way, especially between the client and the helping systems. So that it becomes one of these things where, you know, the cultural definition of a helping relationship is complementary, helper, helpee, right? Advice giver, advice receiver. And when that goes well, people come together, they form that relationship, the person uses the help, and off they go, you know, on their life path. However, it doesn't always go that way. Sometimes it escalates in the way that we saw, and in the case I'm going to show you in a few minutes, complementarity became a very funny kind of issue between the family and the helping systems. The other thing, though, is that symmetry can also spin out, so that it becomes highly competitive. And those of you who work in different agencies know that when you are involved with other agencies on a given case, that every so often there comes a case that everybody wants to be the one to solve, right? Everybody wants to be the one to kind of have the right answer about. A good way to know if you're getting caught in that sort of symmetrical struggle, by the way, for those of you that work in public sector systems, is to ask yourself, how much time am I spending thinking about this case when I'm not working? Okay. And if you find that it's a lot, and you're spending, you know, your evenings and weekends, you are probably caught in some kind of struggle, usually with other systems around who's going to be the one that's going to crack this particular piece here. So, look first then at definitions of relationships using those dyadic concepts. Then, one of the, again, I think interesting contributions from family systems work is the notion of the triangle or the triad. Now, as soon as you bring agencies together, working on something, and a family case, or any case, whatever it might be, any client system, you're going to get a triangle. It's a natural kind of triangle, okay? Let's suppose you have school, mental health system, both working on the same family. Well, that's three: family, mental health system, school system. And if the school is suggesting one way to go, and the mental health system is suggesting another way to go, the family's going to be caught in some kind of triangle. Now, many times that can be worked out. People get together, they have meetings, they look at the treatment plans, they say, all right, you're going to do this piece of it, we're going to do that piece of it, fine. Sometimes, though, and you will know this better than I in your community, there are some agencies that have long-standing conflicts with each other, whatever they might be about, who knows? Funding, ideas, beliefs about how to go about doing a particular kind of treatment, whatever it might be about. And then the client system gets caught with those two agencies. There was a very interesting piece of research that a doctoral student of mine did a number of years ago, retrospective research, looking at families that entered a mental health system in Western Massachusetts and sort of tracking them through the system as to which ones kind of came out the other side and which ones got stuck in the system. Okay, years and years and years, they're still there, people are still aggravated about them, and so on. And in every case where those families had gotten stuck, they were in triangle relationships between the mental health system and some other system in the community. Okay, they became like, you know, these cause célèbres that people would get together, talk about, argue about, so on, and the family never made it back out the front door or the back door. Okay, so you want to be looking for those triadic patterns and asking yourself, what can we do about that? Can we get on the same side of an issue? If we can't, can we be explicit about what our beliefs are so that it's not covert, so that it's not something that people can't sort of ferret out here? All of that becomes very, very important. Now, holding sort of those two concepts in mind for a few minutes of dyads and triads, and then one other which has to do with boundaries, and then I want to show you a case. Again, a familiar concept from family systems, the idea of boundaries. All human systems have boundaries. They are either more or less firm, more or less, kind of diffuse. And you want to be asking yourself, when you're working with other agencies, sort of what are the boundaries? What are the boundaries of that agency? What are the boundaries of our agency? What's our appropriate purview in this case, and what belongs sort of over here? What are the family's boundaries? Where do we enter? How do we enter? All of those kinds of questions are sort of boundary issues that if you don't look at carefully, you see the families then will do some very funny things in terms of, I was mentioning before the break to the larger group here, the idea that, excuse me, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought for 1 second. What was I mentioning to you guys before? Let's not worry about it. Okay, boundaries. Okay. So that's another issue then that you want to be looking at, and to be asking yourself, are the larger systems intruding in areas that are not their proper purview, okay, in the family or in other systems? That's one of the things that you want to be kind of examining and figuring out what's your piece of it and what's somebody else's piece of it. Finally, before we turn to this case, solutions. Okay, what are the favorite solutions of each system is something that you want to be asking yourself. There's a whole school of family therapy that works on the idea that what we need to intervene in is not the problem, but the solution behavior. That people adopt certain solutions to their problems, do those over and over and over again, whether they work or whether they don't work, and that then becomes the new set of problems for people. Now, agencies adopt certain solutions to each other, right, to the existence even of each other. Maybe the solution is to distance. Maybe the solution is to have lots of meetings. Maybe the solution is, I don't know whatever it might be. And families who are involved with lots and lots of systems also create solutions to the problem of having lots of helpers in their midst. Okay? They do it in very ingenious ways. Again, they might distance. I don't know how many of you have ever done at-home visits for people. How many of you have done sort of outreach? Have you ever gone and nobody's home? I mean, that's okay. That's one of the solutions of families that feel like, agencies are coming at them. It's usually not a good one because it gets more people to come when families do that. But it is a solution that some families adopt to try to distance, and that usually brings forth, kind of more tries to get in on them. Now, the case I want to talk to you about and show you sort of what happens when it doesn't work and then how to maybe make it work is as follows. Let me introduce this case to you and show you how we use these concepts, especially of complementarity, boundaries, and solution behavior. The case involved a couple, a young couple of a husband and a wife, Natalie and Lee. And they had 2 children, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. I'm sorry, I don't have an overhead on this one with me. And they came to family therapy presenting that they were having trouble parenting their children, in particular their young son, the 4-year-old, that he was very aggressive, they didn't know what to do, and they wanted, quote, parenting help. And they were sent to family therapy by their family physician. So there was, all right, that system, the medical system, and now the family therapy system. A therapist began to work with them on this issue of parenting, and as he did so, they began to then complain about their marriage, that they were having lots and lots of problems in their marriage, and that in fact, there had been many occasions in their marriage of the husband beating up the wife, so that this was a couple where there was violence, okay? They said to the therapist, that we're not having that problem presently, but we're not so sure that it won't happen again. We're nervous about that. Okay, so violence, the threat of violence was still an issue. The other thing they then began to tell the therapist about was that the wife had been sexually abused in the family that she came from by her father. Okay, so this is one of those cases that probably a lot of you have and are familiar with violence, a history of abuse, some young children, lots of concerns about how is this family going to manage. They started out in the family therapy, they were doing pretty well, and then the therapist said to me when he came to talk to me about the case that in the last 6 weeks or so, there had been a deterioration. The couple was coming in and they were saying to him, we were fighting a lot, we don't understand why, and it's on the verge of the husband hitting the wife again, and we don't know what to do about this. And that's when he came to me and said, you know, would you give me a hand? And he said, I think it must be something I'm doing in my therapy. I said, don't be so sure, okay? Let's begin to find out. And as he told me a little about them, I said, gee, you know, in my experience, this kind of family usually has other helpers involved. Do you know anything about that? No. I said, go ask them. Okay. Those of you that were here an hour ago, you know, I said, do it, always do it with every case. Ask who's involved. He goes back and he starts to ask them, and there was a cast of thousands. Okay, there was. The husband went to a program at the General Hospital for men who batter their wives. Okay, and so this was a group program, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. The wife went to two things. She went to an individual counselor for the sexual abuse at a program called the Sexual Assault Center, once a week sessions, working on the sexual abuse that happened in her family. She also went to a program called Discovery House that ran groups for women who'd been beaten by their husbands. Okay, said she had two counselors there. So the therapist came back and told me about this, and I said, well, why don't you find out if they would all like to come? See if the couple would like to bring all these people, and we'll get together, because maybe what's happening is not something you're doing, or this one's doing, or that one's doing, but that when there are this many systems, with probably giving the couple some different kinds of messages, that can be a real stressor. Okay, let's find out. He goes back and talks to the couple. They say, terrific, we would love to bring in all our helpers. By the way, if any of you start to do these sorts of sessions, the families usually love to bring all their helpers. The helpers are not always so thrilled, but the families are usually very excited about this. And they said to him, and by the way, our minister also counsels us. Okay, one wondered when they had time to go to work, and we'd like to bring him too. Fine, okay. So the first step then in this kind of interview was for the therapist to phone each of these people and invite them. And that's when we began getting sort of the first little drum beats of what was out there, okay? The fellow from the General Hospital Forensic Program said, well, I really don't believe in these kinds of meetings, right? Meetings where you talk with the other helpers and try and straighten it out, but I'll come. I'll come for an hour and a quarter, that's it, 10:30, I'm leaving. Okay. The woman from the Sexual Assault Center, yes, she said, I'd be glad to come. I'm bewildered by what's happening here. I really think it would be a good idea for us to get together. The two counselors from the Discovery House program first said, no, we don't want to come. Then they called back and said, yes, we'll come. The day of the interview, they called up and said, listen, she's not our client anymore. We're not coming. Now, what they meant by that was she had been in a group that had ended the previous Monday. Now, this is a boundary issue here. See, that's the kind of thing I was talking about a few minutes ago, where they are drawing a boundary, saying, we are not a part of this macro system. Leave us out of it, please. And she doesn't belong to us anymore, so forget about it, okay? In fact, as I'll tell you in a minute, they were very important. The minister was delighted to come. So we gather on a Friday morning, all of these people and the couple, And I start out finding out each one's role in this. And this is one of the things you wanted to listen for. Is this couple getting, what kind of messages are they getting? Are they getting messages of, we all see this the same way? That creates one kind of problem. We all see this a different way. That creates another kind of problem. What are they getting? Okay, so here's what they were getting. The fellow from the forensic program said his program believes, capital B, that violence exists in the man. No matter who he's married to, no matter who he's with, he would be a violent man. And that he needs 5 years of treatment for this. And that's how their program was set up, with weekly groups and monthly groups and every 3 months and every 6 months for 5 years. Okay, that's one belief. And the couple, my sense in doing the interview was the couple didn't really know this until they heard him saying it explicitly. This is what we believe. Okay. The woman from the sexual assault program said, we do about 6 months to a year of work with people who've been sexually abused in their families. We don't believe in bringing in families. We don't believe in bringing in the husbands. We work just with the woman. Okay, again, sort of another set of beliefs here. The minister had a spiritual Christian context that he was counseling them in and what couples ought to be according to the Bible. Okay, so there was another set of beliefs there. And the family therapist was doing sort of a family systems, what does the couple want, I'll help them to get it kind of therapy with them, okay? So, and then we heard the people who weren't there were represented sort of by the wife, who said that what they believed was similar to what the forensic program believed, which is that it was the husband, it was all his fault, and that she should be looking at her marriage and whether she should stay in it or not. Okay, so there's that whole set of beliefs. And you want to get that kind of out on the table. They're pretty different, okay? Because then the next line of questioning that I did was about whether people thought this couple should stay a couple, okay? I didn't ask it quite that crudely, but I asked it in terms of how viable was this couple, should they be in couples therapy as far as people were concerned. The feedback was very interesting in terms of the messages that the couple was getting. The fellow from the forensic program thought that, well, really, the marriages that these guys have are not very good. If they want to go to couples therapy, it's all right, they can go, but he wouldn't do couples therapy. The message was, don't be so sure that you want to maintain your marriage, okay? But that had never been sort of stated explicitly. The woman from the sexual assault program, similarly, okay, well, we're neutral towards their marriage, she said, which is kind of funny. I mean, you can't work with one person and be neutral about it's an intervention in someone's marriage, okay? The minister, as you might imagine, said, I'm not neutral, I want them to stay together. And the family therapist said, well, I'm working on what they want, which is to stay together. So here's this whole macro system represented, different agencies represented. There are different messages being given to this couple about whether they are a viable couple or not. And in the last 6 weeks, this time when they were deteriorating, I asked a question, when you've been to see a helper, do you talk about it afterwards? Okay, because one of the things you always want to track as people move through multiple systems is the question, do you bring that material back home? What do you do with it? Again, boundaries. If I've been to see a helper, do I tell my husband about what we talked about, or do I keep it to myself? In New York, where I live now, people sort of very religiously go to individual therapy and keep it to themselves. They don't talk about it with their partners. And they could be in like 10 years of therapy, and they often will not, and so it's like a very important person in their lives that doesn't get talked about. This couple talked about it. Not only did they talk about it, they thought about it, okay? So here's a macro system organized to help this couple. They go off to each of their helpers, they come home, they tell each other what the helper had to say, and then they get into fights over what the helper said, okay? And in particular, the last 6 weeks, the issue was that the program she was going to was telling her he's a bad husband, okay? He was a musician and he was out a lot. He's probably having affairs, said the place. You really ought to look at your marriage. She would come home and tell him this, and he would get furious, okay? So that was sort of the process that we're listening to all together there. Now that, I think, is one important piece of this. Prior to this particular morning, none of these helpers had laid eyes on each other. Prior to the family therapist's phone calls to each of them, they did not know each other existed. So when we're talking about agency cooperation, I think for starters, you got to know who's out there. And you got to know who people are seeing, and then you got to know what do those places believe to stay out of struggles with them. Okay, that is not to say every larger system should believe the same thing. I think that would be, we'd have fascism if that is what happened. It's good that there's differences, but then how do those differences get played out, okay? So now, having told you that much, what I want to show you is the last 15 minutes or so of this interview, in which the couple start to talk about their view of the helpers. It's a very interesting piece. We don't often get to hear what our clients think of us, right? And how they were working the complementarity. See, here they are in this position of being helped, being helped, being helped. So listen for what they were doing with that, okay? We can get some lights. So we took basically, see in that end of session piece there, the predominant pattern that already existed, which was a complementary pattern of the couple wanting to take care of the helpers, and offered them another way to do it, which is to be in charge of the whole helping endeavor. We sort of place them at a level of you look, you examine all of this, and the helpers will know you're doing it. So this went out in the mail, to everybody. Lots of very interesting things happen. Let me sort of tell you that, and then we can take some questions. First of all, in terms of the helping system, the sheer act of getting together for a meeting like this with the family, not a network meeting without the family, had a big impact on them as they were able to hear the family's ideas that that the family helps them. Okay, so they started cooling a little bit, for starters. They also started to contact each other and change those very rigid boundaries that had been, between each helping system, which I think was good. The couple came back in a month and they reported several things. First of all, they did it separately. They didn't sit down and do it together. Now that was intriguing because it was the first time that a helper had sort of given them some instructions and they changed it a little bit. They used to sort of do everything that each helper would tell them to do no matter what. And I thought that in a couple that was having some boundary issues of their own, I asked him how he'll know about problems, and he tells me about her. It was probably good that they were doing it separately. And that in that month, they had seen only one helper, one appointment she kept with Jane. Other than that, they did not go to any other sessions. They sort of pulled back a little bit after this meeting and reported that they were getting along better, that they had joined a social group at their church, not a therapy group, and that they were making friends. And I wish I had it on tape. Natalie said, maybe if we had more friends, we'd need fewer helpers. Isn't that a wonderful line? And then it was Christmas time, and they were each going to visit their families of origin. Now this couple had an interesting pattern that got replicated with the helpers. They would go to see, let's say, his parents. His parents would give him some input, often critical. She would not support him. They'd leave and fight with each other. They would go to her parents, same thing, okay? Her parents would be very critical. He would not support her, and they would leave and fight with each other. Very similar to going to seeing helpers, hearing criticism about the other spouse, coming home, telling each other, and getting into these fights, okay? So they promised each other, this time let's do it differently. Let's hold together. If your mom starts on you, I'll be your support, and so on. Nice. Okay, so they told Bill all of that. I said, geez, that's great. Keep in touch. Let me know what else happens with this couple. Bill came back a month later and said, Evan, I don't understand, the couple separated. I said, couple separated? I don't understand either, let's talk about it. Well, said Bill, he still decided it was his fault, which it wasn't. He said, I gave them another intervention, Lee didn't want to do it. Natalie said, if you're not going to work on this, then I think we need to be apart for a while. Notice the definition there. Not a divorce, we need to be apart for a while and work on some things separately, which they did. Now I think, see, as you look at the changes in the macro system, that as the helpers pulled back a bit, and the couple pulled back a bit, that the artificial props that were keeping these two people glued to each other were gone, and then they needed to do something different. So they did separate for a while. They did a little more work with Bill during that time, and then they reconciled and got back together again. Then several months had gone by. It was June, and I was leaving, and I needed to get new consent to take the videotape with me because I was leaving Canada, moving to New York, and I called them and said, you know, how are you? Da-da-da-da. I had 2 conversations with Natalie. She said, we're back together, and she said, I learned I could live without him, so now I can live with him. I'm not too sure what that meant. I said, are you seeing any professional helpers right now? And she said, no. She said, you know, I think when you met us, we were using helpers as parents, and we just needed to grow up. Again, just very articulate kind of things. And she said, let me ask you about the tape, I'll get back to you. She called me back, yes, I could use the tape for teaching. And then she said, you'll be interested to know that a few weeks ago, I confronted my father about the incest. Now, I'm embarrassed to tell you that the first words out of my mouth were, oh, is anybody working with you on that? It's so ingrained in us, isn't it? And she said, oh no, she said, I just decided it was time. He didn't like it real well, but I feel a whole lot better. And so that is the saga of Lee and Natalie there. And let me just, sort of quickly say that what I think happened were several things. One, bringing the agencies together in the same room with the family is a very big intervention in any kind of interagency process. Different from what we usually do, which is to meet without the client system. Okay? If you're going to do those kind of meetings, you need an outside person to do the interview, not someone who's part of that macro system, okay? Because, again, everyone's defining their relationship symmetrically, and so you need somebody to come in at a somewhat different level who can ask questions, not take sides, not, decide this one's better, that one's better, but through the interview process, help them to resort it out. And then, if some kind of end-of-session intervention is going to be given, it should usually be given to the family because they're the identified client system, not the helpers, and that usually sort of moves the whole thing along. We have 5 minutes. So, questions from anything this afternoon or all day? Yeah?
Well, could you put the 2 together? Have you had any success applying the ritual things to this multi-system setting?
Well, I don't know if I'd call what we did there exactly a ritual, but we did symbolize the macro system, that huge thing. Let me tell you, I went behind the mirror to talk with the people who were working with me. I had in mind a list. Let's give the couple a list and they can quantify, where it's too heavy and that type of thing. And one of the trainees said, no, not a list, a circle. Ah, yes, and we started playing with it. How big should it be, and so on. And it's so big that I can't even reach the top of it there. And then we gave it to them. We gave them a stack of Xerox, copies of this, so that was the symbol. And then we did organize time and space. We used a lot of the elements of rituals. I don't know if I exactly call it a ritual, maybe a little more on the task side of it. But it operated to, sort of as a membership process of who's in, who's out, how are we going to work that. So definitely, I think you can. The other piece we've done with larger systems, with rituals, have a lot to do with the entry and exits from group homes, from home to group home, that kind of thing, using the life cycle transition of somebody leaving their home and joining another system like that and designing rituals for that, and that's been very effective.
I saw your circle becoming another helper, which was
okay.
That as a,
Their own.
yeah,
Yeah.
its own way of
Yeah.
being the best helper.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you've been a great group all day, and I thank you for that, and I thank Sue Johnston for organizing this and inviting me, and do good work, have a lot of fun, and thank you.